Welcome to Vacation Bible Study 2024, the first experience post-COVID. That's after COVID, right? Right. So, as always, we try to do some things. One of the things that I have noticed is the lack of preparation for our responsibility to others who may need us to be their caretakers. It's not a lack of responsibility, but we're not prepared for it a lot of times, unless, we have a little time. But most of the time, when we get into this caretaking business, we have to change all kinds of stuff, like schedules and stuff, and help someone live their life, and it's a wonderful thing. And of course, in our culture, in the African-American culture, that used to be a home thing, somebody's house, always. But now things have changed a bit, and so the nursing homes are being used a lot. But in any event, caretakers, when they put their life on the line like that, it changes, and sometimes they need routines to help themselves. Can you imagine having a situation where you have to live your life and deal with your family and deal with that loved one that can't take care of themselves, and it's a strain on you. But out of love, you're gonna do it the best you can, and hopefully these next two sessions will help us, especially if we can preconceive ourselves in that place, in that space, help us to start preparing for being the caretaker. And a healthy caretaker have to take care of themselves. And I think that's going to be the angle of our first 2 days. How do I take care of myself and auntie, mama, whoever? How do I do that and have a healthy experience with it? So I'll tell you something that happened to me early in ministry school that I was in here in Huntsville. A student was there with me, and a very bright and brilliant student, but I noticed a sadness about her. And as we went on in class together, she finally confided in me that she felt bad. And I said, why do you feel bad? She had to quit her job, and she had to come home and take care of her two aging parents. And both of them passed after several years. And she had this feeling of relief, but she felt guilty about feeling relieved. She felt like, I loved my parents, why do I feel this? And we had a time to talk to her, but she was deep into it, and she had 3 children, by the way, and a husband, and so she had all this going on, and had no help. She was the only child, by the way, and didn't know how to corral other help. And I had the pleasure of talking to her about what was going on inside of her, because for me, that's just something that I did. I see Sister Rice came in. I'm glad she's here. So the next 2 classes, or the first 2 classes, wait, they didn't have the chair for her? Make sure we do that. Make sure we get that chair for Sister coming in. So those are the kinds of things. How do you prepare yourself for being a caretaker for someone else, and how do I take care of myself along the journey? And that's what we're going to talk about for these 2 days. Midweek, we're going to talk about money. Bishop will be here. I hope I might get him to talk about it, because he got some. He has some, and if I had his money, I'd throw my little chump change away. So we're just going to talk about what the Bible says about money. And this is a class that Kerry made up because I made him do something. He decided he'd make me do something. So he got me back real well. So we're thankful for that. There are 2 other classes, and one of the classes is held in the computer lab. It is Devoted to Good Works, and Minister Terrence Shannon. And the other is Empowered Servants, and that's by Minister Pam Reed. And so that'll be held in the conference room. I'm going to pray, and we're going to break out to those various classes, and I'll introduce those who are left in the sanctuary to our guests for the next 2 days. Pray with me. Father, as always, we're thankful that you allowed us another day. It was not because of our goodness, not because of our strength, but it's by your grace that we're here. For that, we say thank you. We ask that your will be done in all it is that we do this week. Bless every facilitator with a word to those who are near and those who hear. Bless every facilitator with a word. Teach them how to be a conduit that you can speak through. And Father, as we go through the week, help us to be open and sincere as we listen, as we learn and interact with the facilitators. We thank you that things are as well as they are for us. We are here, no bombs falling. We are here, not surrounded by an enemy who would destroy us. We're here with food to spare. We're here with houses. And we're here. We have trouble, God, but it's not nearly as bad for us as it is on other lands. It's not because we're better than they are, but by your grace. So as we get together, help us, Father, to glorify you in all it is that we do. In Jesus' name, amen. For those of you who want to attend the class of Minister Terrence Shen, you're going to be teaching what? Devoted to good works. That's in the computer lab. And the other class, Empowered Servant, Minister Reese, stand up. Take your crew with you. Just get out then, all y'all, just go. Just go on, get out, all of you. Just leave then. You too, Isaac. Just Isaac, isn't it? That's not Isaac? Lord have mercy. I told him it's a business. I told him to get out right. What kind of pastor am I, right? Again, there's material on the table. Our speaker came highly recommended from someone with experience in this area and evidently was very helpful to her during the journey. His name is Mr. Willie. Is it doctor? Doctor. My name is Willie. No doctor in here. No, it's Willie Brunetti. Brunetti. With the no flower on your collar tissue. Brunetti. Burnett. He's been doing this a while. We thank him for coming to make this presentation. Show him some kindness as he comes.
Put up the first slide. Again, my name is Willie Brunetti. I'm a 22-year military retiree. I spent 10 years as a civilian contractor here at Redstone and 13 years as a Minister of Education in Northeast Florida. I received my Doctor of Education Ministers degree in 2012, and my project was to create a seminar for family caregivers caring for aging parents and spouses. I was the second oldest graduate in the program at 67. I've tried to retire 5 times, and as of yet, God so far has not allowed me to stop caring for family caregivers. If you notice my degree up there, it's D-E-D-M-I-N. I was told that means it was a dead men degree. I'm sorry. All right, it's not going to work. I'll just set it back here and we'll talk. I know you're sitting there thinking, what's a big, tall, ugly guy like me know about being a family caregiver? Well, my seminar evolved from a history as a family caregiver for family caregivers as a member of my family and others. Over the years, I've cared for an aunt, my father with vascular dementia, my mother and mother-in-law. Now, my mother and mother-in-law lived in the same house with us for a total of 7 years. If you know anybody who's thinking about doing that, have them call me. We need to talk. But each of these individuals brought a unique set of challenges for me as the caregiver and as the care receiver and for my entire family. I was a full-time caregiver for my wife who had a rare neurodegenerative disease called progressive supranuclear palsy. She was in palliative care with hospice agency for over a year, and she passed in June of 2019. Next slide. I use this scripture as the basis for my entire seminar. It's 2 Corinthians 1, 3 through 4. Praise be to God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves have received from God. To tell you the truth, I misread that particular scripture for a very long time. I thought God would bring someone alongside me and comfort me. But that's not what it says. He comforts us in our times of trouble so that we can come alongside someone else who is experiencing the same hard times, and we bring them the comfort we have received from God. God doesn't comfort us to make us comfortable. He comforts us to make us comforters. Next slide, please. This workshop is to encourage and better equip individuals and families who are caring for family members. Most family caregivers are completely unprepared for the duties and responsibilities of caring for a family member. Hopefully, this seminar will help and be of value as you become a family caregiver. Many times, however, we find out we're going to be a caregiver. We get a call at 3 in the morning. Mom's had a stroke. She's in the ER. Come now. Next slide, please. Again, and from the Rosalind Carter Institute, there are 4 kinds of people in the world. Those who have been caregivers, those who are caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will require care. What that tells us is sooner or later, we're all going to be caregivers. I have been a caregiver. I am a caregiver. I have the potential to be a caregiver. And since I'm older than dirt and some rocks, sooner or later, I will need care. Next slide, please. And as medical technology improves our lifestyle, it also means we and our parents will live longer. However, at some point, a loved one will need full or part-time care. And as their children or spouse, that care is going to fall to us. Most of our parents are accustomed to applying caring skills to their children, but many aging children are experiencing a reversal of roles and becoming caregivers to their caring parents. When I was writing my project for my doctoral thesis, I wanted to call it Parenting Your Parent, but that wasn't academic enough for New Orleans Seminary, so it's about this long, and I can't remember what they called it. But we're going to be, either we're going to be the parent who's receiving care from our kids, or we're going to be a kid who begins parenting their parent. I've done both. Next slide, please. And no one really plans to take care of their parents. We don't set aside money or time for the task or begin reading books as soon as our parents turn 65. For the most part, a parent's old age and the need and dilemmas that typically accompany them are a complete surprise. Our parents grow old, and as their children, we rarely see them becoming dependent on anyone. We remember them in their prime, and we don't look to the future for what may take them out of the mainstream of life into a life of dependency. Dependency on us to provide the care. Next slide, please. Caregiving is hard work. It's painful. Learning new things. Lots of questions, very few answers. Caregiving may be the most demanding and stressful thing you'll ever undertake, but it's our parent or our spouse, and we will step forward whether we're ready or not. Next slide, please. This is probably the most difficult of all the things we'll talk about here, is how to work with doctors and healthcare professionals. As you are the primary caregiver, you know more about your spouse or your parent than the doctor does. They need to listen to you. In my opinion, and I know opinions are like noses, if the doctor won't listen, find another doc. Thank you. Next slide. And again, caregiving means compromising your own life, job, and family. A caregiver's family and life will take a back seat to the process of caregiving. Life shrinks down to a narrow focus of getting through the daily feedings, toiletings, and pill doings. It's a tough job. Next slide. Not counting wrinkles, gray hair, and tired bones, and most of us are going bald, American elderly are in pretty good shape. Most will live into their 70s, 80s, and beyond. But broadly speaking, about 100 million U.S. adults function as caregivers, providing care for a child, parent, spouse, or other relative. These caregivers are 95% family members, and they provide an estimated $600 billion worth of care, of free health care annually. If our healthcare system had to fund their efforts, we'd bankrupt the system. Next slide, please. I always put a little cartoon in. It's so nice having my folks here, John. We haven't seen them for almost a year. It scares me every time I see them. They look older. I don't mind me getting older, but I want them to stay the same. Unfortunately, many young people don't understand or comprehend end-of-life issues and the problems it will entail for them and their parent. But as life progresses, it will come an event that no one really wants to discuss. Next slide, please. Caring for our aging parents. This is a subject we simply don't want to think about, much less sit out with a loved one and have a heart-to-heart to talk about the future. Does anybody know what the mortality rate is in Madison County? Anybody? Pardon me? It's 100%. Now, I teach a class down at New Orleans Seminary for master's level students, and they're usually 35 to 45-year-old master's students. And when I ask them that same question about New Orleans Parish, and I tell them it's 100%, they don't believe me. They think we're all immortal. We did too when we were 35. But it's going to come, guys, sooner or later, unless Jesus comes. We're going to have to deal with end-of-life issues. And in my opinion, the best time to talk about it is now, and not wait until the situation becomes volatile and reason and logic are no longer active. In a trauma situation, generally, the loudest person wins the argument, whether they're right or not. Logic goes away in trauma when you're sitting there screaming and yelling at each other, trying to figure out what we're going to do because mom's in the ER. It's just now, plan now. One of the things that's kind of scary is when you sit, and I'm a terminal planner, I'm a GI, okay? I plan everything. But we plan our marriage. I'm sure that all these ladies, when they were decided that all that was going to happen, they went out and made sure they got the right kind of dress, and they got all the bridesmaids together and make sure they had all the right presses, and picked out a pastor who was going to do this thing and what songs. When you bought a house, you did similar things. Where we're going to live, how we're going to do, how much we can afford. You planned it. You sat down, and you went through a system of putting together a plan. Why don't we do that with end-of-life issues? Because we're scared. We just simply don't want to talk about those kind of issues. And unfortunately, like I said, what's the mortality rate? 100%. Next slide, please. Caregiving is, for some, is providing 24-hour care for somebody who can't dress, go to the bathroom by themselves, or think for themselves. For the most part, caregiving is a full-time, 24/7 workday. When my mom was living with us, she had a thing called sundowners. When the sun went down, she lost her ability to cope with reality. So she would get up and wander the house. We finally put a baby monitor in her room. So when she got up to roam around, I could get up and go help her back to bed, get her calmed back down, get her back in the bed. And I was still working full-time as a minister. My wife was a full-time RN. But we had to deal with Mom. It was a tough job, but like I say, somebody had to do it. Next slide. I don't have a 9 to 5. I had when my eyes are open and when I close my eyes. Both my wife and I retired and sort of retired caring for our moms. We hadn't been on a vacation in several years. While caring for my wife, I had 2 days off a month, the first and third Friday of the month. I hired a home care group to stay with my wife for 4 hours a day while I took care of the business of shopping, the family affairs, and enjoying a few minutes to myself. It cost me $19 an hour for that twice-a-month break. But in many cases, that may be the only break you get. Next slide. As our parents age, they are focused with the realization of the loss of the basic staples of life. It's a painful process when they must accept their inability to stand alone, loss of their independence, or worse, the need to depend on someone else to do what they value as important. The other piece of that puzzle is, as the child, we don't know what we're going to do. And the parent that some days doesn't want to accept the fact that they are no longer capable of fending for themselves. Next slide, please. Said you were going a little bit fast there, ma'am. Where were you going? Were you aware of that? Yes, I was aware of that. So you knew you were speeding. Well, yes, sir, I did. But I was just trying to get where I was going while I still remembered where I was going. And where is that? I don't know. You distracted me, and now I can't remember. Next slide, please. So when the roles reverse, remember to love and treat our aging parents with dignity and honor, for without them we would be nothing. Preserving the dignity of our parents as they succumb to the aging is the most important thing we as children can offer our parents. After all, everything we learn from our parents. Next slide, please. I'm so happy you're coming to my mom's birthday party next week, Larry. I printed a map to my house with directions plus a little note about how to maneuver your way through our development. And Larry says, I invaded 2 countries, tracked for miles behind enemy lines, and people still don't think I can find my way to a house 4 miles from my own home. Next slide. As our parents age, their sense of reality is affected. A parent who willing to help us along the way suddenly requires our help. Tasks that weren't easy for them become labored and fall to the wayside. Next slide, please. Ruthie, are you all right? I'm fine, but I've lost my ability to fold a fitted sheet. I don't know how to fold a fitted sheet. I don't think anybody knows how to properly fold a fitted sheet. I don't think it's possible. Next slide, please. Thank you. When patience run low or feelings of deep frustration strike, step back and reflect on the dignity that's owed our aging parents. Keep in mind what was hard for us as children is tenfold for our parents. The what-ifs of life become vivid reality, and the aging parents find themselves torn between dependence and independence. Next slide, please. Sad thing is, Joe, in 70 years we'll be doing the same thing. Still be bald, no teeth, and wearing diapers. Next slide, please. As our parents continue to grow older and personal cleanliness becomes a problem, it was they who walked us through potty training and bathed the mud from our childish antics and recleaned the tub again. while I was in Fernandina, where I was Minister of Education, one of the ladies at church was about to get her mom to move in who had an Alzheimer's. And she asked, what do you do for your mom? And at this point, my mom was completely bedridden. So I told her in the morning I helped mom with her bath, change her diaper. The lady almost screamed, "You change your mother's diaper?" I could never do that. And in my infinite wisdom, I didn't say, "Oh, yeah, you will." But we have to do what we got to do to help maintain the cleanliness and the dignity of our parents. Next slide, please. Another aspect of caregiving is helping your parent maintain their spiritual lives. Many, if not most of our parents grew up in church, and church is vital to their lives. Growing old often doesn't allow them to worship and have the comfort of church fellowship. Like all Christians, seniors need the fellowship and encouragement of other believers. Faith that is not nourished stagnates. Next slide. One of the spiritual tasks of life is to draw meaning and purpose of why and how one has lived. The parents ask, will I be remembered? Will my life be honored? Will my living and even my dying make a difference? They begin to reflect on their lives and their contributions to life. The solid foundation they received through the church and their personal walk can help them deal with the process. Next slide, please. I wonder, what do you wonder, Ruthie? Well, I've gotten so old, and sometimes I wonder, do my old friends up there in heaven think that maybe I ended up someplace else? When your parents can't get to church as frequently as they want, help bring the church home. Contact your pastor or lay leader and see if they can periodically stop by and spend some time with your parent. A daily prayer time with your parent can resolve feelings of anger, fear, and guilt. A daily quiet time with your parent in Bible study can ease the tension of the daily trauma of caregiving, and it will help renew family relationships. Next slide. What I've discovered is neither churches, communities, or the government are prepared for the age of our nation. The fastest growing age group in the U.S. Do you know what that is? The fastest growing age group in the United States and the world? Those of us 65 and older. If we ever got organized, we could take the world back. Since I turned 65 in 2011, 10,000 people have turned 65 every day. That's somebody every 25 seconds. The world is changing, and we need to talk about these unpleasant certainties. Next slide. And conversations about aging and end-of-life issues are avoided because family members feel guilty for imagining the declining health or the death of a loved one. And the loved one isn't really happy about discussing it either. In my mind, it's not grief or loss one should fear. It's being unprepared that should be feared. There comes a time when you realize your parents are getting older, and no matter how independent they are, they're going to need help. It's now time to start that conversation. So many families avoid talking about this until something happens. But it's more difficult to make decisions, again, in a crisis. Next slide, please. It's far too many cases one member is stuck with the care while others watch and provide little support. Siblings must find ways to help the changing needs of parents in order to make the transition. Usually there's one person who's the primary caregiver. It's good if the other siblings can step in and provide respite. Next slide, please. And again, talking to your families about issues and planning for the future isn't easy. Who wants to talk out as pleasant things as illness, funeral arrangements when the parent are perfectly fine? Staying ahead of the game will give you and your parents time to consider the options carefully and will ensure that your parents will get the best care possible. It would also give you peace of mind. Discussing the future also helps prepare your family emotionally for what's to come. Next slide. Make a list of information: medical diagnosis, medications, finances, mortgages, expenses, systems, support systems, healthcare providers. All these things are issues that are going to confront the primary caregiver. Next slide, please. Understanding the healthcare system. If you guys understand it, come explain it to me. What's covered and not covered? Co-pays and out-of-pocket expenses. Any questions? Ask questions and challenge decisions that you feel are wrong. Medicare and Medicaid systems and the requirements for qualifications. Understanding HIPAA requirements. There's a multitude of things out there. As the caregiver, you're going to have to be intimately involved with to make sure that you can provide the quality of care that's out there. Next slide. Consider finances. Long-term care insurance, hybrid or standard. Long-term care insurance is a vital piece of information if you want to provide care and there's a potential for a nursing home. Problem is, if you're over 60, it's almost cost prohibitive. But you can also get it either a hybrid or a standard. The standard is it pays for the care. The hybrid is if you don't use it, it's translated into life insurance. Look at savings, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. The expenses are to be aware of: prescriptions, in-home care, including home modifications, assisted living, skilled care, special care, dementia and memory care. Beware of the state laws. Each state has a different concept of how to deal with the elderly. If you look at Medicaid, each state monitors the Medicaid system. Each state has their own system. In Alabama, after you pass, and the state will look and see if there's any unpaid requirements, and they will come against the estate to pay that off. In Tennessee, Mississippi, and Georgia, if the estate doesn't have enough, they'll come against the kids. It's called filial responsibility. You need to do the research. Know the Medicaid rules, 7-year look back. Now they look back 7 years and see what you've owned. And whatever there is an asset, you have to private pay those assets until you have no money at all. And then Medicaid will kick in. It's a trying system that you need to understand. Next slide, please. Housing options. 90% of Americans over 65 will remain in their own home. However, mobility issues or chronic conditions, both of which will get more serious in time, might affect what kind of care they'll need. And in many cases, the private sector isn't an option for many older adults. A full-time home health care aide costs an average of about $40,000 annual, $49,000 annual. Long-term care facilities can cost as much as $100,000 annually. Medicare and other government agencies provide only a fraction of the long-term care, and Medicare will not cover in resident care. Next slide. Legal issues. These are some of the more difficult. If you have not expressed your wishes or written them down, someone else will have the responsibility of deciding what to do. Advanced directives and long-term life care plans is a document your parents indicate preferences for medical and end-of-life care, including granting permission for excluding specific life-extending measures. A healthcare proxy is identified in this document. In other words, you name someone in your family to make those decisions for you. And if it's not written down, it's quite an interesting concept. I have a friend who was a hospital chaplain in South Carolina. And there was a gentleman who had lived in North Carolina. He moved to South Carolina, left his wife and kids in North Carolina, did not divorce them. Got down to South Carolina, had a major stroke, ended up in the trauma center. And his girlfriend was saying, oh, he's so wonderful. You got to save his life. You got to leave all that on. His wife came in. I'm still married to him. Turn it off. Guess what the state of South Carolina did? Turned it off. So if you don't have it written down, it could be a problem. And they talk about powers of attorney. Those are tough decisions to make, because the power of attorney are powerful documents. You should carefully choose the agent that you give your general power of attorney to. Because without bond or supervision, whatever they do with your assets is legal. So you need to make sure, if you assign a general power of attorney and give it to an individual, you got to be willing to trust them. You got to know they're not going to go take advantage of that process. And it happens all the time. Next slide. Healthcare proxy or power of attorney for healthcare. This is the same way. This document indicates who can make decisions for me if I'm incapacitated. And a HIPAA release. This is a requirement that the hospitals have. If your kid's name are not on that HIPAA document, and you want to find out from the doctors what's going on with mom or dad, they can't tell you by law. So you need to research all that legal mumbo jumbo. It's tough. I believe that each of these issues should be discussed with an elder care attorney or an estate planner. They know the ropes and can provide guidance in these critical issues. My friend, who is an elder care attorney, recommends that although you can produce these instruments from software and online products, she doesn't recommend them, because state laws vary on how and what words are proper in a will, a power of attorney, and all those documents. And if it's not precisely the way the state of Alabama wants it, it's not legal. I have a friend who is a legal aid in North Carolina, and she's got one of their clients is in court because he used one of these software packages, and the state of North Carolina will not accept it. So contact the elder care lawyer. She also says if you go online, you can find out how to do your own appendectomy. She doesn't recommend that either. Next slide, please. Ethical treatments. Decisions your parent may face at the end of life can be complicated and daunting. If they have dementia, you find yourself making those decisions. How does your parent want to use life-saving technologies, kidney dialysis, pacemakers, chemo, or ventilation? What does your parent think about using such intervention for patients who are nearing end of life? It's a tough set of decisions. When my wife initial diagnosis, we determined to retire and move back here to Alabama to be closer to our children. My son lives in Coleman, my daughter lives in Athens. My wife said she wanted her grandkids to know Granny and not the crazy lady. We sat down with our family, grandkids included, and analyzed the entire situation on how it would progress. Throughout the progressions of my wife's disease, our family would sit down and talk about what was happening and how we would each deal with it, including her final days. It's not easy to do, but it sure does ease the trauma and keep things down to a reasonable. Next slide, please. Hospice is not the fast track to end of life. Hospice is not end of life issues, it's quality of life issue. My wife had a terminal disease, and approximately 1 year before her death, we chose palliative care. Hospice provided quality support for her and myself. They helped us deal with the issues mobility, medications, and spiritual issues, while providing comfort for both of us. It's not an end-of-life issue. My dad, who had vascular dementia, he threw 2 blood clots in the base of his brain. Kills most normal mortals. The doc asked him why he was not dead, and Dad said, "I don't know." And the doc told him he was just too dadgum mean to die. But he lived for another 10 years. Most of those 10 years, he was in and out of hospice. They cared for him. When he finally passed in my house, they brought him up from Bibb County to my home and set up in my house his hospital room. And he lived with us for 6 years before his death. Next slide, please. Death and funerals. This may be the toughest subject you'll discuss, but it may be the foremost in your parents' mind. What, if anything, frightens them about dying? Are they more frightened about death, or what the end of life might be? What kind of funeral service do they want? Do they want to be buried or cremated? Have they made any advanced arrangements? I've got a friend in the funeral business, and he gave me a piece of advice. He said, funeral homes are in the business to make money. It's our job to make sure they make as least money as possible and still provide a quality end of life for your loved one. When I was, my dad, like I say, he was sick for about 10 years. And somewhere in that 10-year program, my wife and I went down, and my wife stayed with my dad, and I took Mom to the local funeral home. She thought I was crazy, and I am, but that's another story. And we sat down with the director setting up Dad's funeral. Well, they wanted to sell my mom a vault that was guaranteed not to leak for 100 years. And I asked Mom, "You going to come check?" Now, I could do that because my dad and my wife were back watching baseball back at home. If Dad had been in the morgue, I could not have said that. But we managed to go through that process and set up a reasonable funeral that the parents could afford. And then when Dad passed, all we did was pick up the phone and say, "Mr. Brunetti's passed, do whatever you do," and hung up. And that was the extent of our responsibilities. Pre-planning, and again, I'm a terminal planner, pre-planning is always best. It works so much better that way. And when I was signing paperwork when my wife passed, the guy who I was talking with had a phone call, so I walked around in the showroom at the funeral home. And I saw a vault and a casket there. It was $17,000. And he came back and he said, and he was a friend, he said, "Willie, you know what we call that?" I said, "What do you call that, Larry?" He said, "We call that the guilt casket." He said, because the family will come in, if they haven't taken such grand care of Mom and Dad, they feel real guilty of not doing that, so they'll buy a $17,000 casket to make them feel better. I wouldn't advise that. Next slide, please. Caregiving from a distance. I was still on active duty when my dad threw the blood clots in the base of his brain. But I was in San Antonio, Texas, and he was in Birmingham. I made several trips back and forth. But I kept in touch with these doctors. I kept in touch with Mom. I kept the folks involved knowledgeable that I was still part of the deal. But it's tough being a long-distance caregiver. I had a friend whose mom was in Pennsylvania, and her sister was taking care of Mom. She said, "What can I do for my sister?" I said, "Send her a box of chocolates." Ladies always like chocolates. Thank her for taking care of Mom. Next slide, please. This drawing depicts the lifespan as well as I've ever seen it. This is how it works. There goes a young Mom and Dad walking a little boy through the end of the park, and then there's the son, the adult son, walking Mom and Dad, aged, into the park. That's how it works. Next slide, please. Just like you needed your parents in childhood, when the parents need you when they grow old. Your parents are complex, and unfortunately, changes in their health and abilities, they will come down and unwilling to cope with life. As a caregiver, it's in a part of our role to help them deal with the stress and help maintain a certain dignity to their lives. That's our job. Next slide. This is Brunetti clan in our first family meeting. The sign says, remember, as far as everyone knows, we're a nice, normal family. Normal is the setting on the dryer. The best we can hope for is to be reasonably abnormal. And that's the end of this first session. Tomorrow night we'll talk about taking care of yourself. And at the end we'll talk about what's the church's responsibility in this whole process. Any questions? Any comments? Anything?